So, one thing you learn over time as an anime fan is just how many anime, especially nowadays, are based upon light novels. However, up until this point, I've never actually read a light novel. If you're curious about what I've been talking about, a light novel is basically an anime inspired, somewhat pulpy book that in turn will go on to be promoted by an anime version of itself. Your Emos, Ero Manga Sensei, Sword Art Online, what's the most recent work this season? I forget. But I know there's a ton of them, and they're typically very pulpy, samey kind of affair. And that's kind of a poor explanation about what light novels actually are. And honestly, despite being more episodic in their story structure, there isn't really much that separates them from normal books outside of the pictures. So, they have a more episodic story structure than, let's say, your standard books. Like if you read Harry Potter, even though that's a continuous series of books, that's still not an episodic story structure similar to a light novel. It's really hard to grasp what I'm talking about until you've actually read a book and then read a light novel. It's kind of odd. Anyway, there are a ton of anime that are based on light novels, as I mentioned, or Emo, Ero Manga Sensei, and I don't know why I'm thinking of the ones that are directly made by the same writer. And that leaves a ton of stuff that's kind of just left in the source material, especially if you're a fan of an anime that never seemed to get a second season. Well, that's because the light novels probably didn't need another anime to be produced. So that's enough talk about light novels. Let's talk about this one in particular. And honestly, this is the most straightforward light novel title I've ever seen. For those of you who don't really know, most light novels, especially nowadays, and a lot of anime nowadays, have basically word jumble titles that often get shortened into acronyms. Again, or emo, or what's another one? Origaro, SAO, things like that. Those are oftentimes shortened into acronyms because their title is so freaking long. Anyway, this is a light novel with a very straightforward, very simple title. And I actually do like it. It tells you what the story is right off the bat, and it's not word salad. And I really appreciate that. That would be a pain to type in the title, even if it was shortened. That's enough of my frustrations with the medium. Let's get into the actual plot of this story, shall we? Dr. Glenn, alongside his assistant, an albino Lamia named Safi, work together in the town of Lindworm as a pair of doctors specializing in monsters in particular. Glenn himself is a young man who wants to take care of his various patients and get through his day. However, Glenn and Safi eventually discover a plot by some nefarious bandits trafficking harpy eggs, and that gets the duo involved and a number of the city's illustrious citizens. The plot, as mentioned earlier, is fairly episodic, the story focusing on one of Glenn's patients as him and Safi deal with treating them, and the main plot of the overall novel, being the egg trafficking stuff, mainly comes in the background until the final chapter where everything just kind of comes together. So the plot is very simple and straightforward, but this is the first volume of the series, so it acts more of an introduction to the world and principal characters, so let's talk about that. The world that they live in is one of a post-war society, after a large war between humans and monsters that has only just recently ended, and Lindworm being the only town in the world at the current age where monsters and humans live together peacefully. Lindworm itself is pretty interesting. Not a lot of time is given to its full makeup, but we are given a sense that the city does have a lot of history, especially some of its more elder districts, and when they ever talk about the pre-war stuff or during the war stuff. And you can tell there's a little bit of lingering tension between humans and monsters, but everyone's trying their best to try to move on and live a happy life. Now, as you can tell from the title, this is a harem series. So let's talk about the girls, the most important aspect of a harem. And, well, the ones that we have presented here and the way that they're presented here, they're okay. Because yet again, this is a very episodic story, and this very episodic light novel, and this episodic sequence of events that happens. We don't really get to spend a lot of time with most of the girls outside of Safi. They do come in for little cameos at their own individual intro arcs, but outside of that, they don't really do much until the very end of the story. We're given a good understanding of Safi's personality and haughtiness, especially towards her rivals, and while she's not overly showy of her affection to Glenn, it is always present, especially when she senses someone else starting to hit on them a bit. The other girls are kind of blended to the background, as I stated earlier, until they get their moments at the end in which they kind of get more personality, or at least we get a bigger sense of their overall personality in terms of what's going on. Again, their intro chapters do give a sense of who they are, and later chapters don't really utilize them as best as they could until the end of this light novel, in which case they're used pretty decently. And, well, they have some funny interactions with Glenn that are pretty interesting. Again, towards the final chapters, everyone gets a bit of a bigger role and it all coalesces into one story. But again, earlier on, it's very episodic. I keep saying that word. I have to make a counter or something. And speaking of harems, let's talk about our harem lead, our standard light novel protagonist. He's fine. He's given a decent amount of character for an SLN, or standard light novel protagonist, or SNLP. He's not completely standout. He doesn't really have any standout traits outside of his skill as a doctor and his desire to protect his patients. But he's enough of a character, at least early on, that you get a sense of who he is, at least a little bit. It's mainly because the story is from his perspective. I imagine that if this was someone else's perspective, or if it was a third person perspective, he would have less character than he already has, and he doesn't have that much character as of yet. Literally, the only character I think in this story that has a lot of character is maybe Safi, and that's about it. So yeah, that's basically how I would define this book. It's okay. This is the first volume of a potentially long-going story, so it just needs to introduce the characters and world, and it does a pretty decent job of that. Hopefully the later volumes can go on for a bit more into the characters in this world, and we can enjoy some Monster Girl stories and simple stories in this setting and whatnot. At least the story is better written than SAO, and yes, that is what the standard is for light novels, because even though I haven't read it, I know enough about it, and I have heard a live reading of it, that man, SAO's light novels are hilariously bad, especially the sex scenes. And this is a bit off the script, but I just kind of want to mention that in the light novel, at least the physical book, there's a bit of an author's act session, and he does, of course, mention a lot of Monster Musume. So that lingering question, is the author a fan of Monster Musume, or did Monster Musume inspire this? Yes, it did. It did a lot. Till next time, everybody.